100% cool with me. Yeah.
Cool.
We're being recorded anyway, presumably by Microsoft servers or something somewhere.
Right.
Might as well have our own, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that was.
No.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I mean, I was actually okay. So we've started recording, so I don't know if this is a good moment, but we can cut it out. I was going to say something about the video you sent, but I don't know if it's a good idea to say it here. We can.
I have nothing to hide. I would love some feedback on it. Yeah, I would really love some insight. Like, I've been living in it nonstop, and I'm just would love someone outside of my own head to give me some insight.
I really love that moment where you say you hope that YouTube flags it as a conspiracy video and that kind of stuff, because
oh yeah, I think that's great.
That sort of reminds me of what you were saying, Jordan, now that there is this general attitude now where, yeah, if you make weird videos on the internet, that's immediately sort of like suspicious. Like being an artist is suspicious kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
So, yeah.
I actually think, though, that I'm not sure. Maybe they've since reinstated it, but after after YouTube hallucinated 9/11 in Notre Dame, they pulled those information panels. They just pulled them completely, because my videos were constantly being tagged with 9/11 Wikipedia links, and following that event, they all disappeared, and they're not back on my videos, at least. So you might not be caught for now. But I suspect in the near future it will be flagged for millions of reasons as these nets gain in sophistication of how they think they can psychologically profile people. I really think something like that's on the edge of happening. A kind of Philip K. Dick pre-crime sort of idea. People are dumping their subjectivities into YouTube, you know, and that's all fodder for machines that will be able to pull, or will try to make, you know, determine things about you on the basis of everything that you put on the internet.
You guys sort of made the point in your last episode, like that was like when I was like, oh, I have to show you what I'm working on because we're in similar waters.
Yeah, totally.
But there's something that like I kind of keep coming back to, and maybe this is jumping right into the deep end here, but I almost started this video series with a different. This is something I hope to build to, but I think with you guys I can sort of just jump right in.
Sure.
All right, so we know for a fact that not only whatever the rate now of videos that are being uploaded to YouTube, it used to be, you know, like however many minutes of footage per second is just being created and created and created. We also know that the like major studios have been uploading every movie, every TV show, everything into the database. I did an interview with Mark Hostler from Negativland. He said he was able to confirm in a meeting with the YouTube heads, talking about fair use, he was able to confirm that, yes, all the studios give them data so that they can make comparisons, right? He literally said, hey, so does this mean if you're able to flag all this stuff, do you literally have like every movie and everything? And they're like, yeah, it's provided to us. So it's on like a secret server instead of showing, right? So basically, so they can get content matches. So think about this, is that we are literally training our artificial intelligence to watch every movie that has ever been made by humanity. And what are we training them to do but to look for patterns within them?
I'm so glad you're thinking about this.
Artificial intelligence to become sinkheads.
Yes, exactly. I have exactly the same vision. Yeah. We're building
so I am, of course, terrified. Yeah. As much as I am 100% terrified of this like I see the dystopia like in my face. Of course, we all do.
Sure.
But man, I also gotta figure that there's these computers, if they have to be able, I don't know. I just feel we're
Yeah, dude,
unintentionally training them.
they're gonna bump into this 9/11 stuff really quickly, I believe. I really think that's imminent because the pattern
And
that I'm
that
seeing is
example is
so.
a perfect. Yeah, sorry. I think we got a little lag.
No.
I don't mean to just step you.
No, go
ahead.
Go ahead.
I just saying. I think they're saying the Notre Dame example is a perfect example of that already happening.
Yeah,
right
man.
now, it's
that
seen
freaked me
as a
the fuck
mistake.
out. Yeah.
Right now, it's like, oh, the technology is not accurate enough. Is how that's being.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. So I'll mute. You go ahead. Yeah.
Well, the problem is that as the technology gets more accurate, it's just going to see more and more of it, isn't it? People currently are relating to it as if that was a fluke, exactly. But the amazing thing about that one too is that the Notre Dame fire doesn't really look that close to 9/11 as a picture. I think some of the things in Back to the Future resemble 9/11 more closely than the thing that YouTube already thought was 9/11, on the basis probably of some really simple correspondence matching. It's like towers on fire, with this particular sort of double towered look. That was enough for it to make that call. Yeah.
Yeah, and look, and I mean this with the utmost love. Look who's talking. The guy who's like, "Oh, this looks like 9/11."
Totally. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Taking to the computer, like, "Oh, come on, man."
Yeah. I thought your montage sequence pulled really good material. It's so great to see stuff all like crunched together like that. I'm trying to work on a similar thing of just like how many 9/11 sync images can I get on screen at once, keeping it like barely digestible or readable, because it's I don't know, it's a difficult tension, isn't it? Like whether or not you want to show a whole bunch of examples of something to establish the frequency, or whether you want to not do that and sort of establish the dimensionality or like the fidelity of each individual sync. Because you could have easily gone into Trading Places and done like a super in-depth, like here are, like you even mentioned that, right? Like that you were compiling like a list of all the correspondences, and that would have been impressive in a different way. But in the end, I think I think you hit a really good balance, like really excellent balance. And especially like, I love the aspect of it where it kind of like, well, at least for me, it's like some of those examples are examples that are like, I consider like kind of well known, at least for me, but like, I didn't know the extra like information. Like that's crazy about Russo. What the fuck, man? He like.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel like that's like
so crazy.
Untapped. Yeah, thank you. I was like, I that's been blowing around in my head for the last few years, and I'm like, and then, but for whatever reason, I didn't take it upon myself to like go back and watch the full Russo thing. It was so sort of ingrained in my memory of like, I remember this guy talking about this, blah, blah, blah. And then I was just like, well, wait, let me see if he mentions any more information. And it's like, he literally says, yeah, this is the time frame in which I knew.
Right.
So it's like,
right. Yeah. That's amazing.
It's a total mindfuck. It is 100% a total mindfuck.
Yeah. Jesus. I don't know. Other Alan, do you have thoughts on?
Oh yeah, I agree that like what I found really nice about that video is that exactly it seemed to be things that I'd heard of before, but like you say, Alan, in the video, all the sort of actual in-depth information, like the stuff about the coup album art, and it's almost like stopping for a second and say, okay, we all know these examples, but let's actually look at them more in depth and within the framework of sync, which I don't know. yeah, like, I really enjoyed it. And the way how you can tell that it's slowly like introducing the topic of sync. I love how there's a moment in the video where it gets very psychedelic and there's just like music and the voice of Jake Kotz is speaking, and it's like
Yeah, that's great.
it's like the video is slowly building up towards like kind of
No,
like
that's
what
true. Yeah, it's structurally very nice. There's a kind of very smooth crossfade from
Mm,
from the beginning to the end. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, my goal with this is like I've made a lot of projects that are like, hey, this is free. You know, like I want to make weird shit that I want to make. And then with this, I was sort of like, could I make something like people love the Sync Quick News format? You know, could I make something that's like using some of what I've learned from that of just like how to make it a little more approachable? But then the other thing is like, I've been talking to Will Morgan a lot about, you know, how do we get lost in synchronicity? And I think we've probably all experienced is I would say trading places, and then you suddenly, next thing you know, you're 8 tendrils deep, and you're talking about like the numbers on the side of the cab or like whatever, and you can keep adding and adding and adding. But I'm like, what I want is what do we just like almost dumb it down is not the right word. Like that's not the right feeling I want to convey, but to say like simplified, like minimalist sync, to say like, hey, what is the thing that you can't ignore? Like once you start bringing in all the little details, the supporting evidence of like cab numbers and whatever, it starts to like get a little thin and overwhelming, I think, for at your average person. But if I can just say to somebody, hey, do you see this album cover and tell you what day it was in the printer, isn't that crazy?
Yes. Yeah, no, dude,
that should be enough, right? Like to not add all those other things.
I really agree. I think that focusing, I mean, my work has been going in the same direction. It's like focusing on the picture-based correspondence is very powerful because anybody can compare pictures and see how they're the same or how they're different. You don't have to have a bunch of special knowledge about movie plot lines or you know what I mean, other weird
or esoteric
things to do with media. Yeah.
It's like, well, if you knew Kabbalah, this would be really fascinating. It's like, no, it's just easy. It's just like you see it and it's real.
Well, and it also seems to be objectively like a very abundant area. I see so many album covers and other things. I mean, a big realization for me was that the Back to the Future poster basically maps the structure of that famous 9/11 image, because you've got those two red streaks down on the lower left side, and then Marty's kind of up on the top right with those big chrome glasses and his wristwatch and the silver edge of the door, and also all the telephone wiring is on that side of the poster. So I think that the glasses and the watch and the wires and the poles are all North Tower resonant. And then on the other, because the glasses, because of the shape of the hole on the North Tower, and then on the other side, it's all the fire and the vehicle, which is just what you have. This is, I find that very repetitively is the thing, is that in films that contain lots of 9/11 sync, their posters all seem to be precise high-dimensional structural matches for the 9/11 image itself. That flows through King Kong 76. It flows through Bill and Ted. It flows through Moonwalker, and I don't know, just many of these posters. You could really, if you put them up side by side, they all start to look like the same image, but the image that they all resemble is 9/11. I keep thinking there's some very powerful video piece waiting to be made just out of the posters of these films, But getting to a kind of a more mystical question, like, I just find that amazing that this phenomenon has seemingly provided us with just the perfect material, material that's so like just that the posters could work in and of themselves as a high-dimensional 9/11 correspondence. You know, they don't just match 1 or 2 points, but like a bunch of points all match all at once, just the very surface image, literally the images that were used to advertise those films. It's like, wow, this was a loud signal. It cut through like
Oh
right to
yeah.
the top, you know.
See, there was a period in time, a brief period in time, but a good one was I started this blog. It was I want to say it's like Movie Poster Tarot.
I was about
Oh,
to mention
cool.
that.
Whoa.
Yeah.
And my idea was literally, again, just going to the visual elements of like, hey, fairly recently, I was managing a restaurant that was next to a movie theater. It was about a year or so ago. And every day I would go, and I was still a cigarette smoker at the time, and I'd go smoke a cigarette and walk past all the movie posters and whatever. And, you know, it was a dual purpose for me, was like, on one respect, just knowing, if there's a big movie, how that might affect business in a restaurant. But
Right.
it was also like literally looking around and then treating it like a tarot spread. If you are surrounded by these images, and these images are being released at this period in time, it is essentially like the collective consciousness getting a drawing whenever 10 cards are on the billboard.
It's beautiful. Yeah. Have you seen Alan's SNES divinations? He uses like
No.
Super Nintendo box art. Yeah.
Oh God,
Right.
yeah. I love Super Nintendo. So yes, yeah. Please send that my way.
Well, it's funny because I remember loving that movie tarot blog. That was when I sort of discovered the whole sync blogosphere and stuff, and it sort of reminds me of what you were saying before. What I like about that idea is that you could go into the movies and actually talk about the movie itself, but then that would almost provide too much information. Like by just focusing on the movie poster, it limits it in a way that stimulates creativity, or it stimulates the expression or something.
You know, I hesitate to say this because it's maybe a little weird or something, but we really ought to study theology a little more closely, because I feel like we do have a problem that's very similar to biblical interpretation. We have this huge text, which is like the sum total of movies made, you know, in the last century, basically. And we're trying to like both understand that ourselves as a big object, and then also figure out how to communicate those insights to a wider audience. But it's just the same problem with Bible stories, because they're sprawling, you know, and you can go so deep into any individual one of them. But I think that when people deliver like sermons, they don't exactly do that. It's you know, for me, there's like a whole set of weird questions here to do with education, performance, propaganda, art, religion, all this stuff. Like, we're making media and material that's, I'm never sure, like with my work, what I'm even doing. You know, it's firing on a lot of cylinders at once. So anyway, I don't know, just like a weird aspect of this. It's difficult to deal, isn't it, with this stuff when it starts really really knocking down fundamental boundaries like that, to do with the practice itself, you know.
Right. I don't know if this is what you mean, but one thing that happens to me is that it becomes very difficult to make a sync video, precisely because your personal life becomes so overwhelming.
Yes, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
You just have no idea, no sort of energy. And it's frustrating, because I think that a lot of the turmoil in life that emerges around synchronicity, at least for me, had to do with precisely this inability to express myself. So it's like there's a feedback loop. On the one hand, the experience is not allowing me to express myself, but the experience is wanting to be expressed.
Yes.
It's doing both things at once.
Yeah, there's a double bindy aspect to that. Also, especially because so many of the insights it delivers are like of a sort that the broader culture doesn't seem to be very interested in, putting it mildly, you know. Just this constant like sucking down into the depths of the unconscious where all the repressed material of our entire civilization lives, you know. And it's difficult to like pull this stuff apart from the, well, it's exactly like the conspiracy aspect, you know. It's like, yeah, maybe there is also a conspiracy, but that just makes, now we have a doubly complicated situation. We have to sort of, I think we're all trying to figure out how to talk about this stuff in a way that is honest to all the layered aspects of it and also all the questions that still exist about it, which is really hard to do, especially because I think people kind of, in a situation where like we're making videos or we're making podcasts or this or that, like there is a degree of like people want a voice of confidence that has something figured out. I kind of think that's why so many doctors, for instance, are so like overly bold in diagnosing things and so on. People actually kind of expect that from doctors or want it on some level. So I find myself kind of often really trying to resist like giving conclusive information about anything. But the problem is that we actually are kind of converging on some conclusions now, I think. There really does seem to be some very weird business here to do with 9/11 at least one or a few of the layers we seem to be perceiving, you know. So it won't do to just kind of hide forever with with this kind of like, let's not have a strong opinion or let's not make a bold statement. So I think one of the things that I really appreciated about your video, Alan, is that it walked that line very deftly, but like with maybe a slight like emphasis on being provocative, which I think is just what is needed probably. So anyway.
Oh yeah, there's I just want to there's like 5 things in there. So just as far as being provocative, there's literally there's a few sentences in there where I'm like, I don't even I kind of don't even believe this, but I'm like,
sure.
I'm gonna, you know, like, I don't believe the insinuation, but I'm literally going to word this in such a way to like ride those implications and be like, I just need you to, I'm going to do whatever the fuck it takes to get you to think differently. And if that means being like doing some winking and nudging, fuck it, I'm going to go for it, right?
Totally, dude. Yeah. At the end of the day, you know, people will watch if they watch and won't if they won't. That's up to people, you know. I think it's good to make spiky stuff. Yeah.
And I'm trying to code it in as much, for this project in particular, I'm trying to code in as much honey as possible.
Yes. Yeah.
But okay, so you guys were talking about like back at the idea of trying to figure out how to communicate this. So obviously I start the video like talking about like the frustration with that. I think ultimately I've made a few realizations about those of us who are attracted to this type of thing. And I think, as you said, it's personal, is to say that I think we're probably people who are maybe borderline schizophrenic or something, or, you know, whatever the fuck we are, that we're thinking differently or in multiple dimensions, and it's often complicated and really hard to just talk to people. Like, fuck 9/11. I'm talking about, like, you know, connecting with people in your daily life. You know, talking about fucking, you know, a laundry list, you know, I mean, a shopping, whatever it is, like, whatever it is, we have a hard time communicating and feeling like we're understood because our minds are so busy. It's like, oh, I can put it into these words, but you're not really getting what I'm saying. And I think that's ultimately what's so appealing to me at this point, and I see it in other folks who are turning this into artwork, is to say, why did we pick an artwork that fuses psychology, you know, with with it, like, because we're literally trying to figure ourselves out and trying to figure out how we can
Yes,
convey these things. And ultimately, I find making this artwork more therapeutic than anything. Like, at the end of the day, it's like, this is literally me helping my brain process information, helping my brain, like, so it doesn't feel like it's all just spinning in there madly. It's like, if I can organize it neatly for others, then it benefits me. And
Totally,
I think that's an unspoken draw in all this. That being said, it doesn't just the same way, like, hey, if you add a conspiracy, it doesn't make the sync less true. It's the same way, like, even if this is a weird form of like public art therapy for myself, it still amplifies it, because now I'm bringing in my person, like my, as you say, like, you're getting affected by personal synchronicities. Now suddenly I'm experiencing that, maybe whatever you're getting at it, the viewer who sees my video, when does it come on for them or whatever, all the personal elements are just a whole other layer for us to all experience. So.
Yeah. Wow, yeah, I really identify with all of that.
It's funny because it also reminds me of the video, Alan, you made for Andros Jones, his song. What really excited me about that is precisely that it's new territory. It's art. Like it's you're making a music video that is also a sync video. Like I thought that was so beautiful, because often I think in the sync community there's a lot of and it's great, but there's a lot of making videos as purely like talking, just expressing information, talking. But I always fantasize with the idea of making like a sync song, or like mixing it with other forms of art. I don't know. I really like that.
Totally, yeah. Radical Rewind was like a music video structure. And I wanted more of that. I think like it's very good to hypnotize people a little bit with rhythmic patterns and things of that sort.
So it's interesting to me. I realized this at some point, is that I've made too many fucking podcasts and then gone back and listened to them and realized some shit about myself, right?
Oh yeah, dude. Yeah.
And about sync, where we want to talk about sync overlapping with art, and to say, I used to, you talk to any of the like older sync heads, and they talk about this idea of like, you see how in the beginning Jake Kotza was like, hey, it was almost like a slideshow. Hey, I'm talking about this thing, and here's some images, here's some movie clips, here's whatever. There's like guys like Steve Wilner start doing that, and you have this sort of, as you say, it's informative, similar to what I'm doing right now, right? That's sort of return to style there. But it's like, hey, this is laying out information. And then you see in Jake Kotza and Steve Wilner and all these guys, their sort of trajectory, it gets fuzzier and fuzzier, and there's less, again, you don't want to lecture somebody on something. You want to just tease an idea of like, isn't this weird? Or do you see this connection that I see, or whatever it is, to make it music, to make it something to get lost in. I think it's so appealing. And what's funny is, as a consumer of their art, I remember like being sort of complaining, like, oh, Jake's new stuff and Steve's new stuff is good, but man, I really want them to make more like old style videos, right? And
interesting, right.
I went through this whole period of time, and when I made Vision and the Voice, that's basically like all I wanted to do was just make fucking this like sea of cloudy data points and music and all the different connections that like were vague and letting you feel around inside of it. And it was only after making Vision and the Voice I realized like, oh, I ended up following a similar trajectory as those guys unintentionally, right? Like I wasn't trying. If anything, I was sort of like consciously opposed to that movement in their artwork. But then on a personal level, I ended up imitating that same movement because it was how do I say these things without being confident, without being like, hey, let me dictate to you this information. It's literally just like, I don't fucking know. I don't know. I'm lost in it. How does it look to you?
Yeah.
So I love, and at this point, I appreciate both. It's right and left brain, and hopefully we keep kind of fusing those two.
Fusing. Yeah, totally. Yeah, it feels, Alan and I talk about this sometimes. It feels like Sync is really demanding a very new level of like multimedia art integration in order to express itself. There's, I just also have this sense that talking isn't enough, pictures aren't enough. It needs all that, and it needs music now. And probably eventually it should be, I don't know, like I have weird visions of installation art and things that would, intersect with these.
You ever see
issues,
Synecdoche, New York?
Oh yeah, I love that movie.
Oh yeah.
That's what I'm picturing. We're like, okay, well, if we know how to model synchronicity, oh, we just gotta get it bigger, and we gotta add some more elements, and then I get that's just it, right? It's like how do you think? How do you represent some? It's like this is why everyone's obsessed with like Finnegan's Wake and stuff like that. It's like, hey, how do you take the idea of everything and put it in a bottle?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, that is totally what Synecdoche is getting at, isn't it? With the little model of New York and all of that. Yeah.
It's funny because it also reminds me of what you were saying at the beginning, Alan, about how the conversations you were having with Will Morgan about you can either go into the huge like spider web and try and explain little points out of a lot of different films, or you can take like let's say the Joe Alexander path of just focusing on one film, or even less than that, focusing on one aspect of one film or something. And there is something about that duality between those two poles that somehow reminds me of what we were saying about art, including music and stuff like that. I'm not exactly sure how, but yes, I agree that there's something about that conversation that I find very interesting. Yeah.
Have you realized, Jordan, what is this? Is this like from one of the like Denver murals or something? What is the? Oh no, it's Alex Gray, right? This painting that's your Skype icon.
Oh, my Skype. Yeah. That's Alex Gray. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I just realized that's basically like the spider web.
Totally. Yeah. It's he visualizes it as Indra's net, but yeah, same exact thing.
Well, precisely. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Although with a kind of chthonic feminine jewel at the center of the spider web. It's a darker mandala, I feel. It's actually really interesting because the spider is a really big image in
that right now.
Joe Pesci in that movie plays like this drug dealer that abuses all of Michael's child friends. And his symbol is a spider. They really work with that spider image in the movie. Like it comes back again and again. I find it just so interesting in relation to Spider-Man and his proximity to a few different things. I mean, the Twin Towers, obviously, but I just find it fascinating that movie, like the movie that had a trailer of Spider-Man scaling the towers, is also the movie that launched basically the entire modern superhero movie era, you know? That whole shift in American cinema towards the mythic archetypal register of Marvel and all this stuff really coincided with 9/11. I mean, very exactly, because it was that movie and then all of the clones that spawned, basically.
If there's okay, let me yes and in the sense that for people who give a shit about like the money behind comics and movies and whatever, like as
Interesting.
someone
Yeah.
who I was a comic fan years ago and sort of watched different failed attempts, and I was sort of just aware of that industry and the different whatever thoughts behind it, is to say that the first, what the movie industry considers the first success, is actually Blade with Wesley Snipes. That was a
Sure.
total
Yeah.
like, hey, what
That's
if we
true.
do?
That was a big hit. Yeah.
We take a Marvel character and we don't sell it as a comic. Like we don't sell it as like, hey, look, it's a comic book. We just make it a good movie. Can we just make it a good movie without making it comic movie? And that was what they considered the first success, that made enough money that it got them to do the X-Men movies. And what's interesting,
yes.
right now, if you watch that first X-Men movie, you will notice that what do? But the whole thing revolves around a whatever the mutant ray that Magneto sends out. I don't know, whatever the fuck it was supposed to be. It's basically this ball thing.
Yeah, I haven't watched
the
that one in a
top-
long time, but I do vaguely
He
remember.
puts it on the fucking top of the Statue of Liberty. He sets off this device on top of the Statue of Liberty, and it radiates out across the globe from there. Right?
Wow,
So
dude.
it's like, yeah, so it's like, hey, even if you try and trace that, if you're like, well, my point was like, well, there's these other movies that sort of, I think, actually laid the groundwork for, because Spider-Man has actually been in development hell. Oh, that's like, that didn't just come out as a success. It had to be proven
totally.
that it could be, right?
Yeah.
So to say, when you go to those earlier things that actually set it up, you're still getting the same fucking imagery, the same
Yeah.
same 9/11 resonance. Is fascinating.
I bet Blade is really interesting. I read a connection with 9/11 to vampiric stuff generally, because I think that there's a huge unacknowledged enjoyment of 9/11 as spectacle, which relates to the idea of the vampire as an aspect of the human being that kind of devours the life force of other creatures, you know? So I see a lot of weird vampire stuff clustering around certain 9/11 resonant films and things. I haven't watched Blade in a long time. I bet it's nuts though. Is it nuts? Are there weird?
I have no idea. Alan, have you seen it recently?
No, actually, I have never watched Blade. So
all right, we've got to watch Blade. I watched Blade.
We got homework for us, yeah.
Recently, Blade 2 I watched for some reason a couple of years ago, but I haven't seen Blade 1 in probably since it came out. In my mind, that property is very connected to Spawn, like the first Spawn movie, as that kind of era of like pretty bad computer graphics working their way into comic book movies. I don't know. Maybe they weren't actually around the same time, though. I don't remember.
Well, Spawn was a huge failure for that.
It was,
so yeah. So like this was, I'm outing myself as like how geeky I was, but like this was something that I like was very aware of. It was like at this point, I haven't seen a superhero movie in years. I probably the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, like the last thing I've seen, probably.
Right.
Maybe the second or third one, I don't know. Anyway, the thing is, like, that doesn't interest me. It's literally like the cinematic representation that doesn't interest me anymore, but it really did then. And it was watching, like, where they're like, hey, holy shit, this comic you love is going to become a Hollywood movie. And then to see that, and it was really bad. And it's the same thing.
No, I remember. I saw Spawn in the theaters when I was a teenager. I was excited about it too. Like, I wasn't a huge comic dude, but I had friends that collected, and I definitely read like a fair amount of Spawn. And yeah, it was a horror. I mean, I actually like it more now that I can sort of think of it as not really a Spawn movie, just some other weird movie involving hell and clowns, you know. But at the time, I remember my friend actually walked out of the theater. Like he didn't even sit through it. We were all really disappointed by it.
I considered walking out of it. Yeah.
Yeah. It was terrible.
It's funny. It kind of reminds me of like you're saying how there is this way in which if you're a fan of the original material, the film tends to be disappointing because it
Yes, yeah.
never sort of reaches that. And uh we were talking with
Well,
Jordan
it's like my
the other-
dad.
I-
Oh, sorry. Go
oh
ahead.
no, it's just like we were talking the other day about the new Sonic the Hedgehog movie.
Sorry, I can't
Which
even hear it without laughing. Yeah.
it's a strange it's a strange thing because I watched the trailer and it seems as if I don't know much actually about the Sonic games, but it seems like it has absolutely nothing to do with the Sonic games. Almost kind of like in the same way that the Super Mario movie, that Super Mario movie from the 90s didn't have much to do with that. Like,
Yeah, except that movie ended up having a lot to do with 9/11 instead. So I really wonder what the Sonic movie is going to be about in the end.
right, as like Sonic being the opposite of Mario in the kind of
Yeah.
Sega versus Nintendo thing.
Yeah. It's very weirdly related.
Oh yeah, I really like that. That's a huge fucking insight. Yeah.
It's funny because I was in a bookstore today and I saw this book. There's this book called Console Wars about the kind of the battle between Sega and Nintendo, and I wasn't aware how Sega and Nintendo were really, really big and probably bitter rivals in the 90s or whatever. And so I wonder what that energy carries into the into the films.
Well,
yeah.
that's really my geek history. I was like a huge video game kid, and I had intense, heated debates with my friends about which was better, Sega or Nintendo. I was a Sega kid actually, which was not unusual in Israel. It was like more of a Sega territory, but I gather in the U.S. it was really more Nintendo focused, generally.
Right. No, that's funny. Yeah, because I was a big Nintendo kid, but I liked Sonic. And
I'm now mentally transposing our conversation into a treehouse somewhere. The three of us are in a treehouse. There's like a pile of comics in one corner. Sega and Nintendo cartridges strewn on the.
Are you Marvel or DC or Sega or Nintendo? Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's also sort of making me think that when I was watching that Sonic the Hedgehog trailer, it's exactly what's spooky about it is that you realize that if it's not a movie about Sonic, then what is it?
Yeah.
It's some because that's what's scary about these kind of films that are adaptations of other things is that normally a film will kind of wear on its sleeve like its intentions, or like it will say this is a movie about this, but when you can see that there is such a huge gap between the original material and what they're doing in the film, it makes you realize that something is being told. There is something in this movie brewing, like an organic kind of like. There is a story that I don't even know. Like, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, like, right, the terminology, like using it as like a vehicle, right? It's like literally a vehicle for another message. So it's like, hey, while on the surface it is ostensibly about a hedgehog that runs really fast, what is it really about? I'm also I want to lump into this. I feel like the Super Mario and Sonic movies, for some reason, we need to include in there the Wachowskis' Speed Racer.
Oh, dude, weird movie. Yeah.
Like I feel like it's that same energetic where it's like taking a property, reimagining it.
Yeah, well, I was about to say before that as pertains to this issue of like being familiar with the original material, making it more difficult to see the sync layer of activity potentially. Like my dad is a huge Stephen King fan, and he to this day kind of considers Kubrick's adaptation of The Shining to be a pretty bad movie because it doesn't match the book enough for him, you know. And for me, it's weird because I've never really read the book. I rather think I would be disappointed by the book, you know, because to me that movie is like, I accept that it doesn't have much to do with Stephen King, and I don't care, you know, it's its own sort of thing that's just using some of the images, really, and some of the basic kind of plot setups from Stephen King's book. So like my dad prefers like the miniseries that was made because it more accurately follows the book, but it's a much worse like film, you know. Kubrick's film.
Oh, it's terrible. It's like the guy from Wings, and it's like
the dude from
bad
Wings.
CGI.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It follows the book like perfectly structurally, though. You know, basically chapter by chapter. So I don't know. I think that's really interesting. Like, because that was my reaction with Spawn. It's like, you know, it played fast and loose with the lore, and it didn't cohere to my expectation set going into it. And it's only now, like 20 years or whatever it's been later, that I can watch that movie and care less about that and see it for like the really weird 90s fever dream that it is, completely divorced from anything else other than itself, you know. Yeah.
Yes, Speed Racer. I remember Speed Racer being like, I'm sure that everyone in the sync kind of communities had the experience of like, you watch a film and you sync with it so much that you can't possibly make a video about it because you don't even know. It kind of reminds me of that meme that you referenced in your video, Alan, with, you know, putting sort of strings on the wall and making connections like that. There is this sort of sweet spot where when a film is too heavily loaded for me, it kind of blocks itself in my throat. I just can't speak it. And
I know what you mean. Yeah.
I remember watching Speed Racer and having that feeling, but that was a long time ago. Yeah.
Yeah, I have almost exactly the same feeling about it. I don't really know what that movie is about at all, you know. But it hit me in a numinous, heavy way. So, I guess I'm not ready to understand Speed Racer yet.
I think it also hit me in that weird way. The old debate about like intentionality in sync, because there were just things in that film. There were like, I think there were even like marble statues of Hermes, and like there was weird sort of like,
oh, interesting,
literal depictions of like Greek and Egyptian stuff, and it really made me wonder,
right.
I don't know, maybe that's in the original comics or or cartoons or whatever, but that always kind of spooks me out when you simultaneously notice a layer of sync that is sort of superhuman and a layer of sync that seems human, and they both kind of coexist and commingle. Yeah, I don't know, just usual kind of
totally
things.
Yeah,
you never get over them.
That was my big dilemma with John Carpenter. I find it interesting how people how that particular aspect of sync often seems to get kind of concentrated on a particular individual or group, you know. Like, I don't want to describe other people's things for them or whatever, but maybe it's a little bit like David's interest in ABBA, you know. There's just something about ABBA for him, I think, where like a whole bunch of things come together, and it just like, when a whole bunch of stuff comes together, that intentionality question gets really tricky. And I remain very frustrated with myself that I kind of keep caring about that question, because it seems like eventually you just run into a kind of boredom with it, because there's never really an answer to it. I mean, even if you could meet and talk to some of these authors, directors, and so on, my feeling is that they probably have no idea what they were doing anyway. Just generally, because this stuff was so long ago, and we all know how it is when you're working on a piece. It's like a fugue state almost. You don't remember every decision you made or what you were thinking. You know, these things just come out how they come out. So at a certain level, I think we're just stuck with the question. But that doesn't stop me from asking it over and over and over again. In like every single video I do, I probably ask that question once every 5 minutes, you know?
Yeah.
Well, I think for me, I agree with you. I find myself constantly asking that question: is this intentional or is this synchronicity? And while, you know, from like a postmodern art criticism sort of, you know, like I was watching something, I don't know what the fuck it was recently, and something just said like, well, that's not even a question. Like we acknowledge that's not a question anymore. Like that's been covered by postmodernism anyway. Like for me, it's like no, because I'm not just trying to praise an artist as like, look what you did. It's not about the artistic lens in that respect. It goes back to the question of, well, then what does it mean? Because
Right.
if Stephen King writes a book and he wants to make it about vampires and it's a metaphor for blah 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 and blah blah blah, okay,
Yeah.
then I get that's what Stephen King is trying to say to me. But if
Yeah.
Stephen King was trying to say some shit about vampires and suddenly the universe like aligns to use his book as a vehicle for some message about like space dolphins, then I'm suddenly like, wait. Why is the universe going through all this trouble to hijack his artwork
I
to tell
know.
me some shit about?
Oh,
Like,
man.
is that important? Do I need to pay attention to this shit?
That is such an interesting question. Yeah. Well, for me, I think it's also like a double issue there almost, except maybe in the end it becomes kind of the same issue. Sorry, now I'm realizing maybe I can't even describe this issue. It had to do with, I'm sorry, can you like reiterate the like last 2 to 3 points you made? I got stuck in a subtle idea. Now I don't remember what the context was I was thinking about it in. We were just talking about what? Sorry, I do this a lot.
That's all right. The synchronicity hijacking somebody else's artwork to put its
Hijacking
message in
Stephen
it.
King. Right. Well, because it's like, yeah, I guess maybe it was this. It was like, first of all, it seems to me that Stephen King is coming at you and saying, here's my art, and I've constructed that art consciously. Like maybe in the case of The Shining, it's about alcoholism and family abuse or something, since I haven't read the book, I don't really know, but seems like that's kind of the thing. But then it's like Stephen King himself is a complicated mixture of like many things. In other words, he's writing that novel in collaboration with his imagination, which is maybe up to something else. And so then there's the possibility that there are multiple interleaved sources of authorship just in the work, but then there's also the possibility of a live interleaved authorship from you or from somewhere else that sits in between you and the work as you experience it. So in addition to something that might have actually been captured in an objective way that you could show to another person, that say John Carpenter made a movie about a canister of green gas that lives under a church, but actually that was a movie about, or not actually, but in addition, that was a movie about 9/11 because some information from the collective unconscious flowed through John's brain unconsciously even for him, and that ended up in his work. But then there's also the possibility, which I've been experiencing lately, that as I watch a film, and in particular as I cut a film, like as I make a film using other people's films, that process starts happening to me, and things start coming through in my art and in my interpretation of art, which is itself a kind of art, things start coming through in those places that are actively precognitive in my life, that seem to be pointing towards things that then happen in the near future. So there's actually maybe kind of like there's the intentional authorship, there's the unconscious authorship, and then there's the unconscious authorship as interpretation and remix that occurs in any act of observation of the art, which then includes also my personal stuff and anything collective that might be coming through me. So maybe there's actually kind of like a quad, there's like 4 variables to consider there.
Yeah, and put that into a more universal context to say every human being is doing that. Not everybody is making sync videos, but everybody is internalizing. Every person who goes to see Avengers, whatever the #1 movie in America is, I don't fucking know. Something, it's like everyone goes out and sees this movie. They're not going home and then cutting some weird sync movie out of it, but in their own brain.
Are in their heads.
Yeah, in their own brain. It's sort of like, okay, well, this means this to me. This means this to me. It's building a neural network in the brain,
right?
Or consciousness, not even in the brain. Yeah.
Maybe they even have like dreams about those movies and things, which then they're really literally kind of remixing those elements into other stories. Like, Alan, didn't you have a dream? Waller, Alan, did you have a dream recently that was a movie-based dream? I don't remember what it was.
Yeah, I was watching the sort of Hellraiser 3.
Oh,
Your-
right. Oh, God. It all related to Hellraiser. Fuck, yeah.
And then sort of, yeah, the nightclub scene in Hellraiser, I kind of was in there. But then, of course, yeah, that's the strange thing when you mention that if a blockbuster movie is released, on the night of the blockbuster's release, a lot of people are probably having a dream about that movie.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah.
So suddenly, a lot of people are having a synchronized dream in that they're all kind of, that content is coming into their mind, but then it's all bleeding into their personal lives, and they're probably like, because the Hellraiser 3 scene in my dream was related to my personal life. It kind of morphed itself into my story. So, yeah, and then you wake up the next day and you probably kind of, your mood has been affected by that dream, and you probably take certain decisions unconsciously because of how your mood has been affected by that dream. So if a movie, a blockbuster movie, can get into the minds of so many people and make them dream about, like, the day after a blockbuster movie release, it's being like pushed forward by that energy.
Yeah, there's some giant, like, cascading wave of actions that are all kind of invisibly influenced by this weird big fantasy that everyone collectively had on the day of release or something. I think that's an amazing insight.
Yeah. So
well,
is
that
this?
almost.
So I just want to say, do you think then also, like, if the movie existing just by existing wasn't already enough to put it into the collective consciousness, all those people then going to sleep and dreaming about it, is that like uploading this data set to the collective server?
Right. I mean, I'm very curious about these kind of questions because I always think of Terence McKenna, how he gives these strange anecdotes and examples that that in my personal life I've sort of found kind of resonate with me. But he talks about how he has that weird idea of how a certain drug can be empty. It's an idea that when I first heard it, I thought it was very strange. He has this idea of like ketamine, how ketamine was a pretty new drug. So when people took it, it was kind of empty of data. It was kind of like big empty spaces. But that mushrooms, because they'd been taken for so long, was really baroque and full of like stuff. and then he had these other weird ideas of how basically precognitive contents through plants. So I remember there was this idea of how him and a group were in the jungle and they were trying to find a certain plant that grew in that jungle, but they just couldn't find any plant of that kind. And they took ayahuasca or whatever, and it seemed as if the trip was kind of signaling to them the location. It kind of showed like, you know, a certain location in the jungle, and kind of they followed the ayahuasca's kind of lead and got to that place. And yes, there was that plant was growing there. And so you could see that from a sort of precognitive point of view of like sort of Terence McKenna having a precog, but you can also see it as a literal kind of, literally the plant is telling me something.
Yeah.
And then it all kind of
well, I think I've kind of determined for my own like personal opinion about this or whatever, that there is no difference between precognition and authored messages. Any precognition is an authored message somehow. I'm just throwing out a statement I can't possibly justify or argue for. But I really feel like, at least in terms of this 9/11 material in the films, it always appears in a way that looks written out. It's like Marty sitting down to write that letter. It's written with love and a little bit of desperation or something. It doesn't, in the end, feel to me like an exactly natural process in the sense of a dumb process. Like we always use these metaphors of magnetism and all that stuff, and we always say that there's a lot of truth in that, probably. And I still say that because whatever it is, it's we are intelligent authors, and we also are natural systems. So there's no reason that synchronicity can't be the same way. It can be a weird kind of force of attraction that's almost like a physical law of some kind, and at the same time, it can be sending authored information, and I think it is. However, I don't know exactly what to say about it, because it seems to me that, how to explain this? I never exactly have the feeling that it's directly authoring information. I think the information feels authored in the films, mainly because the films are authored. They're authored. You're watching a story. It's been constructed. And then these other weird precognitive things that appear in there that are hooked into that story in a way where you can't kind of pull them out of the, you kind of can't separate them. But the amazing thing is the degree to which it feels like the story that exists consciously has been, in a sense, pre-cut. It's already been cut. It's already been remixed into this other form. Something else remixed it already, and it remixed it by grouping things closely together. But it in time and space. But it groups them with such a poetry. See, it's just always what I'm amazed by, is the poetic voice of this stuff when it's expressed. And I think I've noticed that in my own life too, with precog stuff. It's always a message at the same time.
No.
I don't know. Yeah, go ahead.
So I wanted to respond to something Alan Waller said, and then I'm listening to you, and I'm loving everything you're saying, and I'm also realizing that what I was going to say is essentially like the opposite, and I love.
Oh, great.
No, I love that you're having this perspective, because what you're saying is gorgeous, and it's like, yeah, I see it. It's like, well, so here, basically, I see the beauty and poetry of synchronicity, of course, and I think you put into words something that you said it very eloquently, and something that I feel in a very real and emotional, visceral, bliss state of like just being in awe of the beauty of the universe. I want that. That being said,
yeah, even as I was saying it, I was like, I'm leaving out, like, so please don't.
Oh, no. No, so I'm always afraid that I'm like, I'm looking at the, you're showing me this beautiful landscape, and I'm like, oh, that's gorgeous. By the way, do you see that rock over there? Where like, and I'm like, fuck, am I picking out like ugly shit? So that's what I'm worried about. Not that you missed, not that you didn't package it all in there. It's that I'm worried I'm just a negative motherfucker, But so when Alan, you talked about the ayahuasca story, and it's funny, I have found myself in the last 2 years or so, like I'm not talking to sync people as much as I used to. I'm just talking to kind of regular people, And every now and then, like, if I just want to throw like a little seed out or whatever of like, oh, you're into something that's maybe a little weirder, thinking about things a little differently, that ayahuasca story has come back for me again and again when people are talking about psychedelics. That's still the most fascinating. If it was the equivalent of like the Coup Party music album of psychedelics, for me is like that question of being like, hey, they said, of all the ingredients in the jungle, how the fuck did you know to use this plant? You have, thousands of species of plants. How did you know? And they're like, oh, we smoked this other plant, and then they told us about these. I think that's fascinating. But there's a second part to that story, right? So then he's like, hey, all these people take ayahuasca, and they see these other spirits. They see these serpent spirits. And the dude says to, I think it's like Terrence McKenna's relaying this story, and he goes, what's the deal with the the serpents, they told this other shit. And the shaman goes, oh, those guys lie all the fucking time. Don't listen to them. Right? Like, oh yeah, those guys. And it makes me think about you ever read the Iliad?
Yes,
I haven't. No.
I did it in high school, so I'm not like overly familiar with it. Yeah.
It's a whatever. It's a Greek tragedy, but what's interesting to me is that it literally starts with like the gods all up in Olympus talking about this war between Greece and Troy and whatever, and they're like, hey, I have an idea. Zeus says, I'm going to send this guy a precognitive dream that tells him if he goes and sacks Troy, he will be successful and he'll be the new, like, the main shit in the world. He'll be the fucking coolest dude ever, and his victory is guaranteed because Zeus fucking deems it. So literally the guy has this dream and he goes, fuck, I gotta go do this. And he goes out and does the shit, and it's a lie. Zeus says, I'm going to give him a false precognitive dream. He literally sets the guy up for failure by giving him a vision of the future that is intentionally not true. It is totally misleading. It's whatever. And it's this trickster element, this idea of like the spirit, I sort of just wanted to ask, like, how do you balance those things? Something I always struggle with is balancing like the poetry and beauty of the synchronicity and also the full awareness of both in my life and in other things. But there's this other sort of element to it that's like sometimes not as friendly, and I don't even mean that like in like mean or evil. I mean it as just like.
No, I totally agree. And I didn't specify that the messages were not evil messages. They might be completely evil messages. I don't know. I think for me, the truth is I feel that I don't really have any idea, of course, synchronicity, I agree. It does have this very dark aspect, profoundly dark aspect. I mean, think about what we're talking about just broadly. Like 9/11 isn't a light topic, So even there, I feel like there's a profound darkness, but specifically about the idea of synchronicity leading one astray with communications that are setting you up for disaster. Let's say. I've definitely experienced that. I think we probably all have. Alan, have you? Disaster.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes.
But I think that in the end, for me, and maybe this probably comes down to like aesthetic bent or something. Maybe I'm a little bit more of an optimist or something, but I've noticed that often those disasters have really been useful. So it led me into useful disasters. It didn't just lead me into any disaster, It led me into a disaster that crystallized something, that perhaps crystallized something I really needed to be dealing with that I wasn't dealing with. And I hadn't been dealing with it for so long that now my unconscious found a way to trick me into a situation that is going to force me to deal with it. And maybe if I had dealt with it consciously before, I could have dealt with it in a less traumatic and horrible way. But because I insisted on avoiding it, some way had to be found, and so it figured out a way to trick me. And maybe it was really brutal, but usually in the end, I come away feeling like, okay, whoever you are, angels, devils, whatever this is, like, I guess this was a good lesson. On the other hand, I also think it's really not very good to fall into this sort of religious mindset all the time, where you're interpreting everything that happens to you as an instruction or a lesson or a spiritually predestined sort of event in the story of your life, because I think it becomes very easy to justify, consciously or unconsciously, I guess, but in a way to justify deliberately placing yourself in situations where you suffer when you don't have to. Like I've realized that for me, that I often, I
and
think
those
that
around you suffer.
Totally. Yeah. Well, I think I found
Yeah,
a way
like
to
that's
kind
a
of
fucking Son of Sam or some shit. Like, hey, I'm listening to my delusions no matter what. There's.
exactly.
I think
Right.
we
Right.
have to maintain this healthy mind, healthy balance of like literally like what we're doing is we're sort of like deep sea divers and like so we're going into some dark fucking murky territory within the collective
Yeah, man.
psyche and
Yep.
knowing not to get lost down there, knowing to fucking come up for air and sort of not everything that we bring back has an application here, and I feel like
Right. Right. Right.
um
I wanted to ask you,
I
do you
don't
think
yeah.
it's more of a danger getting lost in the collective psyche or the personal psyche?
Oh, probably personal. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Me too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm my own worst enemy and my own biggest abyss for
Same.
sure.
Yeah. Yep.
No, it's funny because I love this topic because it really reminds me of I don't know who said it, some occult author I was reading or whatever, that in the dream world, just like in the in the waking world, you can trip over a stone or something and hurt yourself, or you can find a shark in the sea and the shark can bite you or whatever, and therefore there are sort of precautions, like if we are to take these imaginal realms as real, then there are similar kind of precautions as the ones we have in our normal world.
Real life. Right.
Like that there are dangers, there are things, and yet, and that's the scary thing, that a lot of these experiences, exactly, they're like honey or something. They really lure you. There's a sort of paradox involved because they really lure you into believing that somehow anything dark is good or something, that somehow you can be devoured and torn apart and do and all sorts of things, but that ultimately it's good. But
And they really like that down there. They're just all about tearing you apart into
right.
bits. Yeah.
And there's a lot of interesting questions here. I think one that comes to mind is that, for example, because a shark doesn't necessarily need to hate you, or like a tornado. A tornado doesn't need to hate you. It can just hurt you because you happen to walk. Like there is a way in which there can be, because there is a way in which there can be things in these kind of experiences that could hurt you a lot, in a way that is just dumb, in the same way that you would get hurt if you tripped over and broke your nose. Like it's just a dumb kind of way of getting, like, and that's the thing, that there is a way of ascribing, and I do it a lot, but there's a way of ascribing meaning to these kind of wounds that can be equally dumb. when you're just sort of like, oh, I just broke my nose, or I just did, like, and seeing, like, there is something about seeing that as always safe, as if the psychedelic realm is just a safe place where no matter how much you die, you're like, there is a paradox in that, I think, because if we treat it as a real world, then why don't we do the same kind of things that we do in the real world, as in sort of being cautious, and
I suppose it has to
like
do with the feeling that the consequences in the other world are less permanent. But I really question that. I think that just kind of seems that way because dreams are very liquid in their imagistic presentation. That doesn't mean anything. People extrapolate way too well. First of all, no one consciously extrapolates anything from that, but it seems like people unconsciously extrapolate an entire worldview about that, kind of on the basis of that. Like daydreams and fantasies, it's also liquid and all over the place, so that means that there aren't consequences there. But I don't think that really follows. At least I've experienced the opposite as well, you know. First of all, I've literally experienced that, and we all have, and that's the whole kind of Jungian view that it's not just all over the place, you know. There's a lot of repetition in dreams and fantasies. And in a certain way, it seems to be kind of the same story and similar images over and over and over again once you cue into the nature of it, you know. Well, that thought trailed off into nothing, but maybe there was an interesting idea there.
Well, I mean, just as because I can definitely think of many times in my life where I had extremely uncanny kind of syncs and precog dreams and all stuff like that all seem to be saying a certain thing. Like, for example, that I have this disease, or that this bad thing is like there are certain ways in which, like what Alan said about Zeus, that there are certain ways in which we can get tricked into, like, the uncanniness of the sync seems to be proof to us,
right,
of its truth. Whereas you can have incredible, mind-blowing syncs that seem to point in a direction that is completely untrue, and that actually would throw you into the abyss if you were to take it literally in the real world.
I really have been running into this problem very
sort of
practically. Like, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, I can say it in one sentence. I just want to say I've been thinking about the fact that this when I was talking to you about the Iliad, it occurred to me that that's one of the oldest surviving stories of humanity.
Oh,
right. Like,
yeah.
Like, what have we figured out that we really need to pass down here? But I don't know. But like, of course, there's a lot of like ugly militarist weird shit in there too. So who knows? I don't want to read too much into that. That was all I was gonna say. So yeah.
No, that's really interesting. That's true. Yeah. Ancient stories. Well, I've been really feeling the like desire to read the Bible lately. I never actually seem to follow through on that desire because it's kind of a very poorly written book as far as I can tell. Like, in terms of the actual language style, I find it hard to read, you know. It's a shame. I'm very interested in the stories. But anyway, I was going to say I've been running into this problem of kind of the trickster aspect of sync, and trying to separate the literal and symbolic domains in my life, because I'm kind of trying to affect this move to New York City. And I went and visited there and like interviewed for a job and did a variety of other things. And when I was there, it was like this. I kind of had thought, because I've been a little isolated, like I've been separated from big populations for a while, and so I kind of thought that getting back to a big city would maybe start to mute sync a little bit. I'd kind of developed an attitude that maybe sync is something that you have to maintain a certain degree of isolation to really, it's a basic idea about magic, that magic happens in the quiet, secret spaces. And if there's too many eyes on it, the Tao flies away. It doesn't sit with you or something. But actually what happened was I went to New York, and like at the same time that all this stuff was happening, like actual literal things in the real world were happening in my life, also the synchronicity was flying off the hook. Like, it was crazy, the degree of information that was flooding my subjectivity during that trip, you know. And the thing about it is that my reaction to it was that it must be a trick. I thought kind of, I exactly had that attitude. I was like, well, fuck, this can't be real, you know? This must be some big, crazy, symbolic thing that's making me feel like New York is the right place to move. And I ought to be really critical of that, because I'm probably confusing New York as a symbol, because I know, right, that I've been intensely meditating on New York for many years as I think about 9/11 precognition and all this stuff. So New York has come to occupy a special place for me in a mythic register. And so I kind of thought, like, okay, here I am living in this myth now. And I've got to be really careful with that, because I could let it make a decision for me that's the correct decision symbolically, but maybe the wrong decision literally. In other words, maybe there's nothing particularly about New York and I ought to move somewhere else that makes more sense for some practical reason or something. However,
Well,
I formed that
yeah.
idea and then was like, well, okay, I guess that is that. I shouldn't be too hung up on New York. I should just follow jobs conveniently where they're going to take me and not worry about where it is. But now I'm back around to realizing that actually I think I was really wrong. I think that I think actually what I was experiencing was just a moment of alignment where my outer world and my inner world were getting along for the first time in a long time. And that actually makes it quite the correct decision. So I think I am moving to New York now. But it's been a very weird, like, half-year-long process of kind of wavering through that question, which I think would not have been a very complicated life decision if I wasn't a synchead. The fact that all of that other weirdness is going on made this whole transition much longer and more painful and more difficult. I should have just followed my instinct, actually, to start with, probably. So anyway, I don't know
as I say, like,
where I come down on all those questions.
Do you think, you say, would this have happened if I wasn't a synchead? I think
Right.
it's the same way another way to ask that question would be if I were to make these decisions unconsciously.
Exactly.
Right? It's not to say that the average person isn't basing their decision to move somewhere based on a bunch of subconscious and deeply repressed thoughts about things, or this complex concept of what New York means as a symbol versus a reality. Everyone's operating on those procedures. You just happen to be aware of it, and like me, slightly neurotic about your awareness of it. You're like, shit, maybe I'm too aware.
Yeah, no, totally. It's a real thing. I think we're all to a certain extent struggling with the awareness. It's learning to modulate it a little bit and how to relate to it. It's a huge thing.
Can I throw out here, like, it would seem to me, and these things don't have to be mutually exclusive, but just as an outside person to your situation, obviously it could still mean a literal move. Again, this alignment of your inner and outer states. But the most obvious thing, regardless of what's a practical decision for you and all that sort of stuff, is to say the most obvious thing to me as someone outside you is, like, it seems like a desire, not so much like, oh, is this dangerous to step into a myth? That could be an escape into fantasy, but I don't think that it's the desire in all of us to wed our spiritual, mythological headspaces with our waking reality and saying, hey, I want to embody. I don't want to just conceptualize and get high and sit at my computer and think about weird shit and weird movies. I want to actually live a life that is fulfilling, that embraces these things and experience it as I can walk and touch and be with people and all those sorts of things. And I think that's a really healthy desire.
I love that. Yeah. A message from the dead, but the message is live.
Yeah. I get that. Yeah. That's fucking for real. I get that message a lot, and it's hard because I think the message to live is it's a big responsibility. It's a really
it is, especially because it seems to be not just to live, but to live authentically, and that's really hard. Yeah,
you can't just fake it and fucking stumble through it. You gotta actually, if you're gonna do it, fucking do it.
Yeah.
That's the weird thing about a lot of sync research, is that when I'm making videos and stuff like that, it feels like, on the one hand, I'm sort of making investigations into the nature of sync, and it has this sort of academic feel about it. But at the same time, if I actually look at my videos, they all seem to be saying the same thing, which is, follow your heart. Like, it's all kind of like messages about living your life authentically, about precisely getting off your computer in a certain sense and doing certain things that I not doing because I'm too afraid of them. Like it's as if on the one hand there is this big grandiose it's sort of this Robert Anton Wilson duality of, on the one hand you are kind of like investigating the cosmos, and at the same time it's this sort of very mundane thing of like, it's as if I am trying to gather enough motivation to do all these things I'm afraid of doing. These very
I know, there really is
these-
an aspect of like we're tricking ourselves into taking bold actions that might help us.
right.
live better.
Right. Or if I just lived the life I wanted to, that would be irresponsible.
Exactly.
But if some crazy weird sign from the universe told me I do it, I guess I have to.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it kind of
Alan, can I ask maybe a personal question? But
Yes.
do you have a sense of what you would like to do? That like the things that you feel. I'm just curious.
Yeah.
You don't even have to tell me, and I don't want to know if that's too. I just sort of curious. Like, do you know? Do you think you know what you want?
I think so, although to be honest, that is something that I've often thought I knew, and then kind of I realized like I didn't. So there is a discovery, but that's the funny thing. I think it's the starting point, at least, is very mundane. It's very sort of like, I would just like to make more music, draw comic books. Like I would just like to, like, on the one hand, do more art, which is what I would like to just spend my time doing in a sense. And on the other hand, I would just like to be less afraid of interacting with people, especially like, I don't know, have a romantic partner, like just the kind of the usual sort of stuff. And it's funny because I watch sometimes sort of, well, my videos from years ago, and it's all the same thing. I'm just saying like, oh, look at this 80s movie. It's about following your heart and doing art and like, I'm just
that
kind
describes so much of my material too. It's really rather sad almost.
sort of hammering
that way.
hammering myself on that. There is another aspect of it though, which I would like to share, because I think it is interesting that there is a way in which sync work has, on the one hand, yeah, it's kind of hammering on the head a point that I already consciously know, but that I'm sort of like afraid of doing. And there are other aspects of sync where, or dream work and all this kind of stuff, where you do discover things that I didn't know that I wanted, or discover that there are things I thought I wanted that I didn't.
Yes.
And
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
kind of a scarier thing. Like, sort of, I was talking with Jordan the other day about this, that sort of issues about sexuality, for example, that I sort of have been coming to terms with bisexuality over the last sort of, well, all my life in a sense. But there are ways in which it's sort of, there are moments in my life where I think that I know myself and I know what I want. And then dreams and fucking analyzing 80s movies somehow bring stuff to light. And I'm like, oh, right, okay.
Yeah.
So there is a strange kind of mix about
Yeah.
I don't know how
I feel exactly the same way vis-a-vis
don't know.
discovering. Well, that's the thing. We laugh when we say analyzing 80s movies, but that's just because it's a new space. If we were talking about card reading, I mean, I guess a lot of people would laugh at that too. But there's generally I think it's easier to conceptualize what's going on there, right? It's like, yeah, you know something already. You just don't know it consciously. And so you surround yourself with a bunch of material so that you can intuitively pick things that feel right. And then you just pick. And in the end, you see, there it is. That's what I knew that I didn't know. I picked it out of the noise.
Yeah.
Unconsciously. So we're just doing it with movies because that's what's available. They're all over the place, and they add something extra special, which is moving pictures and stories all tied together. It really is seems like a next gen tarot deck. 80s movies, I mean,
Yeah.
The deck is a stack of frames, just a whole bunch of pictures that are all sequentially related,
Mm.
weird objects, these things. But anyway, the thing about finding deeper aspects of yourself, maybe particularly sexual aspects or other repressed, deep personality level aspects and things, like, man, yeah, I totally relate to that. Sometimes I wonder if that isn't the entire thing, actually. And all the rest of this stuff about 9/11 and all this other thing, that isn't all just actually functioning in the context of some other thing, which is much more about personal psychological improvement or something. I don't really think that in the end, because things get too weird for that explanation to be satisfying. But I just say that to indicate that, yeah, I think that's a huge aspect of sync that maybe isn't always acknowledged as much as I would like or something. Even in my own work, I don't. Because it's natural to want to shy away from publicly discussing the really personal stuff. But I think that we do neuter the work slightly by doing that. I'm trying to be much more bold about that stuff. But you mentioned, I just bring it up because you mentioned sexuality, and that's always the last and most difficult. It seems like the most difficult thing to like integrate into either discourse or art practice, because there's just a lot of uncomfortableness about it in the world, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
That externalizes it maybe too much.
Agree.
There's a lot of uncomfortableness about it inside us as individuals as well, I would suppose.
I think we as humans, that's probably why the subconscious is, it's clearly swimming with sexual imagery, is because it's the thing we're repressing so strongly. And, I think, like you, I mean, I often come up with, and I don't think this is, again, not unique to us. It's like, it is the thing that, is so it's like, if you can imagine, you step into this subconscious landscape, if you were to draw that as a space, just to try and picture like, landscapes on the horizon, how many of them are going to be phallic, how many of them are going to be yonic, how much of that is in there, of like, this is our most essential programming, and the thing that we're most ashamed of or unsure about, or all these things. I feel that very, very strongly. And
it was like the first thing Freud ran into. It's like, oh, I discovered the unconscious, and then immediately it's just a river of sex, basically.
Exactly. And his mistake is to say, oh, so then it's all sex. It's like, no, it's just like, there's a layer of sex on everything. It's like,
really
it's the moth
dense
that's
layer
growing
of sex on top of everything. Oh, that just makes me think about Ghostbusters 2 and the slime flow beneath Manhattan.
Totally, yeah.
And how it culminates in the art museum, which then the Mother of Exiles, the Statue of Liberty has to shatter the toxic psychokinetic slime to liberate the art museum full of images.
Come on, man, that movie, that fucking movie, what are they doing? They literally traded their laser guns for fucking cum guns.
I know!
They circle jerk Bukkake on the fucking Statue of Liberty to like to raise her kundalini, and like, what the fuck? It is the most tantric, insanely mad. Like, it's fascinating to me. Like, Ghostbusters 2 isn't as good a movie for me. It's like not like enjoyable as like 80s comedy, but it is fascinating how much like actual magical and tantric thought went into what is essentially a 2-hour-long sex joke.
Yeah, I agree. It's more, part 2 is more interesting to me from a sync perspective, although part 1 is fascinating too. It already has some of that stuff, with the don't cross the streams, which seems like an obvious prohibition on homosexuality. But then at the end, they have to cross the streams.
They have to. And what happens? They explode the white goo all over the city. Yeah, it's literally
Well, but the weird thing about that white goo all over the city is that it also is very evocative of the ash that actually fell onto New York City in 9/11. It created a kind of a Christmas on 9/11 out of all that snow, essentially, from the towers. So I think all those images of people covered in that marshmallow foam running around Manhattan screaming, it's just almost identical images to the to the images we get in the Naudette documentary of people running around Manhattan covered in ash screaming. So
There's
close.
sorry, do you know this little bit in the first Ghostbusters? There is one shot where they're like Ray and Winston are driving along like the Brooklyn Bridge or something, and where he says like, "Oh, cats and dogs living together." What's up?
Oh, are you talking about when they're talking about Revelations? And then it pans up.
Yes, yeah, precisely.
Yeah.
They're talking about the Book of Revelations. Talking about the Book of Revelations, and then it shows the World Trade Center in the background, just when he says like the sixth seal.
Yeah.
Right.
And they mention specifically the dead rising from the grave. Yeah.
Precisely. Dead rising from the grave. But he says, Book of Revelations, the breaking of the sixth seal. Well, what do we play out your 9/11 story in the news? What else is... So 9/11 is perpetrated by Osama bin Laden, and then 12 years later, Barack Obama assassinates him. How using the attack from SEAL Team 6. Literally, Osama bin Laden is killed by SEAL Team 6.
Jesus,
so when you see Ray and Winston go, 6 SEAL with the World Trade Center.
Wow, amazing.
That's a fun one, right? That's like so dumb, but I fucking...
Well, I've been thinking recently about Revelations, because it's so clearly like a psychedelic vision. It's unlike anything else in the Bible, basically, and it's a dense text, but I've been reading it recently, and kind of seems to me like the central imagery in there is a vision of Christ with a sword coming out of his mouth, right? Which I think is like the North Tower with the antenna and the hole that looks like a mouth. So it's as if we have a sword and a mouth on that side of the image. And then the other big image in Revelations is the lamb with 7 eyes and 7 horns, is it? And then but it's a lamb that's also slaughtered. And if you ever watched my analysis of the South Tower explosion as it appears in that one famous image, it looks quite a bit like a goat or some other small animal being slaughtered. All that debris coming out of the bottom of the explosion, it kind of looks like blood coming out of a neck, and there's like this funny face in it. Anyway, it occurs to me that Revelations could be read in the context of an image match for 9/11, which is so fascinating because what that vision was a vision of the return of Christ, specifically at the end of the millennium. So it pinpoints the point in time really exactly too. I used to be kind of a little bit weirded out by the idea of like 9/11 resonances as far back as the Old Testament and so on. But now I'm really starting to think I perceive it in the New Testament. It's just, I guess once, I don't even know what my attitude about that is really, because it's like I'm still thinking of it like the information is still, even though I recognize I think about it this way, I just still prefer for some reason to think about it as if the information is moving through Jell-O. So it's slowed down or it becomes more resistant as it goes back through time. But it doesn't really appear to be that way. And why should it be that way, I guess? Once it's out of time, it can just pop up anywhere at that point. It's weird to think that it could defy time at all, but then somehow still be subject to some kind of rule that would make it less plausible that a precognition would happen 2,000 years before something versus 2 minutes before something. On the other hand, though, it does kind of seem, doesn't it, like we get more frequent and more accurate information about 9/11 in these properties as it scans up to the date. Like that episode of The Lone Gunman, that was released just a few months before, you know. In fact, it was released, I think, precisely 191 days before. But anyway, that piece contains, or maybe it was weeks or something, I don't remember. But that episode contains so much of it. I mean, it's literally the Twin Towers, literally being hit by a plane, literally in the context of a false flag operation. Wow, that's really accurate now. There's nothing like that back in the 80s. So maybe there is some weird thing that the closer
Right.
we get, I don't know.
Yeah, that is so explicit. And then you have to figure that like that show is literally like dealing with conspiracy theories.
Right. Yeah, it's so weird. Yeah.
It's just like to be that exact. And I've seen multiple interviews with some of the guys from the show who like they insist, they're like, hey, this is like we just think it's weird.
Right.
They're like,
yeah.
Like there's no one being like, yeah, we were trying to whistle blow anything. They're just like,
Right.
oh, weird, huh? I'm like, no, that's too weird.
yeah. I don't understand that either. The kind of shoulder shrugging at things like that. It's the same thing with Dream Theater. They were aware, of course, you know, after they made those posters for live scenes from New York, of the correspondence, but they end up just kind of shrugging it off. Maybe they have to, you know. I mean, I'm just thinking like, so I low-key precog this like shooter wave right before the first couple of attacks. Like, I had just suddenly found myself researching shooters again. And in specific, shooters that seem to be sinking in weird ways, you know, because I'm very interested in that as a kind of shadow area of sync and the kind of modern internet-empowered occult, generally speaking. But just that experience which was kind of a minor experience, you know, I found myself drawn to a topic, and then a few days later, that topic was on the news in a big way again, you know. But that was really disturbing to me, like, particularly that, because it seemed to be a precognition of a really horrible thing. And I imagine that if I had made some art that precogged 9/11, I probably would have been, especially immediately following that experience, even if I was an open-minded artistic sort of person, I think I probably would have been pretty interested in just forgetting about that, you know. That's deeply weird, troubling, because of course one has the feeling maybe you could have prevented it somehow or something, or just, I mean, that's a ridiculous attitude, but it's hard not to feel that way a little bit. Yeah,
that's fair. That's totally fair. Is like feeling like some sort of responsibility, because I was gonna say maybe I'm just cut of different cloth, and I'm like, I don't know how to shrug. I'm like, well, totally. That's really specific. Yeah. I have to live with that and spend the next 10 years figuring out what that means.
Exactly.
This is my life now.
Yeah, totally.
It's funny because like, oh, sorry, go on. I was going to change topic a lot.
Yeah, please do.
Oh,
yeah,
well,
please.
No,
you're the only one who has like one leg out of this 9/11 bit in this conversation. So, please.
No, well, I mean, I was just going to say like, I find it very interesting, this idea of the creators shrugging off a sync in their own work, and I was just sort of wanted to share sort of one thing. Like, I was watching Nicolas Cage interviews the other day, and I think it's the first time I've ever seen an actor acknowledge a sync, I think. I haven't really delved that deep into this kind of research, but it was so interesting because Nicolas Cage was talking about how he was obsessed with John Travolta in Saturday Night Fever.
Oh, dude, I watched this too. I saw.
Oh, right. And he was so obsessed with John Travolta that he was imitating him. So he was like dressing up like him and walking like him, and he was kind of, there was one day when he was just sort of imitating John Travolta and just walking down the street. And at that moment, John Travolta drove by and stopped his car. and they looked at each other, and apparently they were sort of like looking at each other for like a while, and then John Travolta drove away. And then Nicolas Cage says it's pretty spooky that years later we would make Face Off, where like we're kind of impersonating each other. So I thought that was really cool. It was just kind of like an anecdote, but just funny, this idea of like, because I always wonder about that. If you're an actor, again, it goes back to the Andrus Jones kind of thing as well. It's so interesting to me if you were an actor to perceive that. Yeah, because like I just got very recently into amateur theater acting. I joined an amateur theater group with some friends, and I've only been in 2 little plays, and I didn't decide the characters I was going to play, right? The director decided them for me, and both kind of characters had like a similar kind of vibe.
One was a doctor, right?
One was a doctor, and the other one was kind of like the how would I say it? Like I was accompanying a doctor to see a man in his deathbed. So in both cases, and there were two different directors, and it just makes me wonder, like with the Nicolas Cage thing, like wow, I wonder, because Nicolas Cage openly says that he's into reading about alchemy and stuff like that. So it must be so strange to. It's the opposite of the shrugging motion, right? If you're actually into this kind of stuff and you're in an acting environment, you suddenly find like that you become a character in your own research.
Yeah. Well, like in the interview, he was talking, the other interview, text interview, he was talking about his journey into researching the Holy Grail. This is just like his character in
oh yeah.
in what's the name of that fucking movie? National. Yeah.
Whatever it's, yeah. Anyway.
Like that's a crazy.
Well, can I just?
Yeah.
I just want to throw. I mean, that's just it. It's like there's very little in between. It's either you have to shrug and just never think about it again, or it totally consumes you. And I'm thinking about bring back to comic books for a second. You guys have read Watchmen, I'm sure.
Yes.
Right. So do you know the thing where like they have the smiley face motif, and then there's like, Dr. Manhattan builds the thing on Mars, and there's a smiley face on Mars.
Right.
I had watched an interview with Dave Gibbons, the illustrator for Watchmen, and he talks openly about the synchronicity. He calls it as a synchronicity. He says, hey, we had been working on Watchmen, and he said they didn't start off with having this idea, and as they were working, as they're like the first few episodes, first few issues, they're like really starting to click on this idea of like logos and iconography and really playing up the smiley face and these different sort of archetypal symbols or whatever. And it was in the process of making it that they're kind of having some of these realizations and whatever. And they had already decided, okay, we have this smiley face motif and all this sort of stuff. And he says, so then he's tasked with drawing Mars. And he literally goes to the library and he gets like all these like high resolution, NASA satellite scans of Mars of like, hey, this is the best like photography we have. How can I depict this? Blah, blah, blah. And he comes across this spot on Mars, which literally looks like a smiley face. And he's like, oh, shit, it's there. Like, I can draw this, and this is scientifically accurate and whatever. He's like, and he said it was that moment that it clicked for them of like, oh, we're doing something else. This is something dealing with synchronicity and all that sort of stuff. And it really like made all the ideas click into place for them. And amazing. Of course, Alan Moore goes on to become like a fucking ceremonial magician.
Right.
To be like, okay, I'm completely invested in this. I stumbled into it. Now I'm completely in it.
That's interesting. Wow. So he developed his interest in ceremonial magic after Watchmen.
I don't know when his interest began. I don't know if that's a correct timeline for just like how much of it was he exposed to. But the idea of like fully infusing his
Intensifying.
artwork.
Yeah.
They're like, this is because at that point he wasn't public about it. He said if he was meddling in it, he wasn't public about it, and then he started to incorporate that into his artwork and then study it explicitly and all that sort of stuff. So
Interesting. Yeah.
That's amazing. I remember that comic book felt extremely charged for me with literally in a physical body sense. I remember reading Watchmen and my body just vibrating or tingling. On the one hand, because it was very good, but on the other hand, because it's about synchronicity and it's constantly making these connections between things sort of consciously, it becomes like a shamanic drum or something. It put me into a trance. And the whole book is about time stopping. And I remember it's such a magical object, that comic book. I remember, at least to me, it really worked some sort of magic on me. It was really good.
Wow, I really must have just sleptwalked through it. I did not really have an intense experience with it. I kind of sped read it almost when I was 15 or 16.
Right, I read it very recently, so yeah.
Oh, cool. Yeah, no, I read it when I was really young because I was reading Johnny the Homicidal Maniac and James O'Barr graphic novel, like The Crow, and gothy graphic novel things. And some friend of mine was like, you should read a real graphic novel, basically, and gave me watch it. So I kind of read it partially out of a sense of obligation or something. I don't think I really connected to it deeply. I thought the film was marvelous, even though it's kind of a weird and bad movie. But I like it as a bunch of pictures. I should really go back and read the comic.
I haven't watched the movie. Yeah, I haven't watched that.
Zack Snyder. It's a lot of slow motion, like men being punched in slow motion.
Right.
If you like, so for whatever reason, I find this quite enjoyable. It's it's very his style is so style, it's hyper stylized images, and it works really well for comic book stuff. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, all I know is Alan Moore saying that he didn't want to watch it.
Yeah.
Something like that.
I actually, because I read the book a long time ago. I don't really have any sense of how it aligns or doesn't so much with the book.
Right.
I bet it butchers it. It's a short movie.
Hey, guys, if I may throw a little monkey wrench here, I'm gonna have to hop off soon. I just saw the time.
Yeah.
And before I go, I want to ask you just to say, Alan, how was uploading everything to the site? Do you feel comfortable? Are you guys happy with the response? And
yes.
Is there anything I can do for you as far as that stuff all goes?
Oh, I was really happy. I was really happily surprised to see how easy and user-friendly it was. I'm really happy about that, because I'm really bad with websites, and it all worked really nicely. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to adding.
Yeah, that's thanks to Guillaume. That's
awesome.
Yes. Yeah. No, I mean, really nice. Everything nicely sort of titled and easy to look at, and yeah. And,
I don't know what just happened. I was just saying, yeah, that's all Guillaume's doing. It's he built that very, very, very well.
Cool. Yeah.
Yep. Yes. No. I really like how that website works and looks.
Cool. Well, if there's anything, like I said, if there's anything I could do for you guys, I'm trying and be there for you. And then I don't know. I feel really good about everything I want to say. There's a part of me that's I notice you guys, seem apologetic still sort of feeling your way around that sort of notion of things. And just as an outside person, I want you to know that like listening to you guys sound very, cogent and intelligent and like clear. And I hope in time you guys, and I mean this just even in your day-to-day life or whatever, it's just like hopefully you'll feel more confident of like you don't sound like a madman, or maybe it's just that I'm because I am, and then I'm like, oh yeah, but that sounds normal to me.
Well, thanks, man. That's really, really appreciated because, or at least just speaking for myself, like this is just new to me over the last 2 to 3 years. This whole sync thing, I'm just kind of like still learning to be comfortable with it. It's just very good to hear stuff like that. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I'm really, really excited to hear what you guys put out, and like really new just kind of getting your new perspectives, like to listen to it and like seeing, okay, I've thought my own thoughts, over and over in the hamster wheel, and I've heard David and Bill and John and all these guys over the years of like, I kind of know where they're coming from, and then to hear where you guys are coming from is really, really refreshing, because it's like, oh, okay, you do have a different foundation under you and a different perspective on it, and it's just like gets to feel both familiar and new at the same time. So it's really, really nice.
That's the great thing about this stuff. I've really enjoyed that as well. Just seeing, on the one hand, how similar all the things are that we're all doing, and on the other hand, how in each individual case it finds this beautiful, unique expression with all of its unique individual properties. I just love it. I've had such a fun time, and just, I don't know, a kind of cathartic time seeing how everybody relates to all this different material. And I'm very proud of us, by the way, overall. I think we're doing a pretty good job of trying to squeeze through an anticipation of something really huge that none of us know what it is yet. But and it's kind of a thankless job in a lot of ways, But yeah, I think we're all doing it, and it seems to me that the more that we can, I don't know, I want to say something like sort of push through the personal work to clean our respective goggles better, then we'll all have perfectly individual yet perfectly networked clean glasses through which to observe this phenomenon. And I just see that happening in my own work every day and in everyone else's work every day. I'm so excited to see where all this goes over the next even 5 years, to say nothing over the next 10 years. These new tools coming through with the neural net stuff and all this are really going to enable some much more profound sorts of insights, I think, about all this material. It scares me a little bit to think about.
Well, I'm glad.
I have this impression that Netflix is going to crack it first, because Netflix, Netflix needs to do this. Basically, Netflix has a reason to go through every video movie that's ever existed and just feature detect in it, because they're trying to develop categories so that they can make recommendations to you. But they probably don't want to have to define the features. They'd rather just put all the data into a big generic neural network and have that network figure out what to pay attention to. But the way that a network like that would figure out what to pay attention to in a film is just to notice any pattern. It's not going to differentiate, because it doesn't. The whole point is you don't want to have to tell it that in advance. You would like it to figure out that there's such a thing as action movies and there's such a thing as romantic comedies. And you would like the network to automatically figure out all those categories on the basis of pattern analysis in the data sets. But as soon as there are systems like that are doing that, they're probably going to find a category of movies about 9/11 that are anachronistic. I really think that these systems are gonna
Yeah.
are gonna flag a whole bunch of movies as being movies about 9/11 or potentially about 9/11, and then people are gonna have to deal with why that particular set of films exists in these data structures that these nets are going to pull out. I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm totally wrong about that, but I really think something like that could happen today almost. You know, it seems to me just a matter of time, if indeed this stuff exists in the way we all sort of think it does. So yeah, I don't know. I think big things are coming.
Well, I'm excited to take that ride with you guys.
Yeah,
And
me
have
too.
you. I really appreciate you both very much. I'm sorry I gotta run off here. Don't hesitate if you need anything. Shoot me a line.
Cool, man.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, thank
you so much.
Oh, thank you both, man. That was fucking. I literally lost so much. That's why I'm like kind of have to rush. It was like I didn't realize how much time had passed. That was fantastic.
Oh yeah, how long have we been talking? Actually, I have no idea.
2 hours.
Just like 2 hours.
Oh
yeah.
wow, nice. Okay. Yeah. Nice. Well, okay, dude. We should let you go then, I guess. This was super fun though. Thanks so much, and we should do it
thank you,
again
guys.
soon. Yeah.
Yes.
Please,
thank
yeah, I
you.
appreciate you.